Greetings everyone and welcome to Using Six Sigma with Lean IT webinar. Happy to have you all here with us. I am Artelamani, the PECB organizer of this webinar, and the guest for today is Peter Davis, PECB certified trainer and principal of Peter Davis+Associates, providing IT governance, compliance, security, and audit consulting worldwide. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, or you can use the raise hand function. We will unmute you and you will have a chance to ask the question directly. Peter will answer to all questions accordingly at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Please, Peter, you may continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Arta. So our agenda today is quite simple. I'm going to explain a little bit about Lean IT, and the use of DMAIC in it. And to do that, we have to start with a simple definition of our process. Now, I'm sure you've seen something like this before, and in fact, when we go to talk about value stream mapping, we'll talk about something similar to this. But we have our input, and we have to do some sort of processing, which normally is done through some activity, to create output. What is a little bit different is I also show here the measurement and control aspect of it. So again, we're going to talk about plan, do, check, act. We're going to talk about DMAIC. And then another thing that you might not always see is the inclusion of policy and standard. So policy is usually where we define our outcomes, what we expect. Sometimes in ITIL they call that a critical success factor. And to support those policies or outcomes, we need to have standards. And the standards that most engineers will appreciate are the specifications or the key performance indicators. So when we start to talk about processes in our organization, everything we do can be considered a process or part of a process. And what we're trying to do is to determine the nature of the process itself, such as that every process can be characterized by its average performance, a mean, and also the variation around the mean. What we're trying to do in Six Sigma is to limit the variation around the mean. In fact, one of the things we do, we start to look at what's called, is it a stable process? And in Lean, they call that Mura, which is a type of waste, and that's the variance or variability around the mean. And then once we determine that there's a stable process, then we try to see if it's a capable process. So capable processes are those that are performing optimally when there's limited variation around them, the expected value or the mean. So there's minimal variation, as it says here. So in general terms, and it's a little simplistic, but we're only here for half an hour, is we use Lean to move the mean, and we use Six Sigma to reduce the variation around the mean. Now generally, when we're talking about processes, we'd like to map our processes, so we start to do process mapping. And as it says here, one of the process mapping we use is SIPOC diagram, SIPOC, or a value stream map, a VSM. And the reason we do this, as it says, is to learn to see. By putting something down on paper and sharing it with the people who are involved in the process, it allows us to see where there might be waste or problems in the processes themselves. We might notice redundant processing, or a lot of times we see that there's unnecessary movement. You know, we're sending it from one group to the other group and then back to the first group when we don't necessarily have to do that. Also, when we start to do our mapping, we see that there's unnecessary wait times. Somebody submits a form, but that form is in process for 3 days because, you know, it is not the time to process it or something like that, or they don't have time to process it, so it goes into a queue. So our process mapping assists with identifying and planning our future improvements. Now, one of the standards that can help you out there is the international standard ISO 15504. Sometimes also called SPICE, and SPICE is Software Process Improvement and Capability Determination. It's a simple model. You can see the process, and it says the process is examined by a process assessment. Now, there are at least 2 process assessments that are involved in an IT service management organization. There's a COBIT, Process Assessment Model, which is called a PAM. There's also something called TIPA, which stands for Tudor, T-U-D-O-R, ITIL Process Improvement. So these are both process and assessment methodologies, and that leads to a capability determination with respect to our processes. And then that identifies the capabilities and risks associated with each one of the processes. So if we don't have a capable process, then we're at risk of not meeting the purpose of the process. If we don't meet the purpose of the process, then we risk not meeting the objectives of the organization. The process assessment, one of the reasons we do it is because it leads to a process improvement. We can see that there's gaps. You know, we're a level 1, we want to be a level 2. What do we need to do to get to level 2 from level 1? We have to look at the activities that we're not doing and the artifacts that are missing, the inputs and the outputs. And then by doing those and working on improving those, we can move to level 2. So that identifies changes that need to be made to the process. Again, that standard also defines what a process reference model, well, that family of standards, 15504, also defines what a process reference model looks like. So there'll be areas. Within the areas, there'll be domains. Within the domains, there'll be processes. Sometimes within processes, we have sub-processes, and then it's further broken down into activities. So here's a simple process reference model where you can see the areas. We have governance processes and we have management processes. As well, you can see that the management area is broken down into 4 domains, and each one of the domains, the one in the governance and the 4 in the management, are further broken down into processes. Now, if you went and looked at the detail associated with this, you'd see that there was activities and inputs and outputs defined in the process reference model for this particular model. And there is our friends at ISACA provided something called a process assessment model, which basically allows you to do a process capability assessment. As I mentioned, there is also a similar model for ITIL called TIPA, T-I-P-A, and again that stands for Tutor ITIL Process Assessment. So again, if you don't like the model, the process reference model provided by COBIT, you can use the one provided by ITIL. The only thing that differs in the approach to doing the assessment is level 1, where we use different process reference models. So if you're doing ITIL, you'd use the ITIL process reference model. If you're doing a COBIT assessment, you'd use COBIT process assessment model at level 1. Now, when we start to assess our processes, we see that there are a number of things that are wrong with our processes. We sometimes have customers that complain about the process, and if you look at the 3 attributes that are given here, there really are something what we call MURI in Lean, M-U-R-I, which means that we have inflexible processes or we have overburdened processes. So it's a type of waste as well. So we've already mentioned MURA and MURI, and we'll talk about a third one in a second. Sorry. Again, what my challenge as a developer or an IT service manager is to negotiate between the various stakeholders in my organization to provide value for the organization. Sometimes I'm delivering a Cadillac version when really people just want a Volkswagen version. They want something that's simpler, they want something that's faster, something that's cheaper. A lot of times in IT and other places in our organization, we find what is called a hidden factory, where there's all sorts of costly sub-processes that are being done because at some point in time somebody asked for it to be done a long time ago, and we never stopped doing it. So there is waste in the eyes of our customer, and in fact the waste is anything that doesn't provide value to the customer. The customer doesn't really care that we have to store or inventory our product, or they don't care that we have to transport it to get it to them. They really don't care about that. And so waste is anything that the customer is not willing to pay for it. So it brings us to the concept of Lean. As it says there, Lean is not an acronym. What it really means is we want to take the fat out of our processes. What typically happens in an organization when they say, oh, we have to cut 10% from our budget, is they go to each department and say, you know, cut 10% across the board, which means that we cut 10% from staff, 10% from everything else. And what happens when you cut 10% of your staff, then when times are good, you have to go back and rehire these people, and generally that's at a higher level. As well, the good people then say, well, if I'm going to get cut, I'm going to leave before I get fired or laid off. And so you're left with the people that you wish would have left but didn't, and the ones that you wish would have stayed have gone. And so it's not a good way to do business. So what we should be doing when people say cut 10% is to look for the fat in our processes. There have been numerous studies that say in North America, generally 99 to 95% of processes are basically waste, which means that only 5% of the things we are doing actually provide value to the customer. And again, you know, our friends at Toyota, who have been doing this for over 62 years and using something called the Toyota Production System, or TPS, have only managed to get it down to 60%. And that's, you know, and that makes sense, because think about it, is that, you know, some waste or some non-value-added things are going to be required by laws such as Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, or maybe by industry associations like PCI, Payment Card Industry. So some of these things require us to be non-lean. So what we want to do, though, is to focus on those non-value-added activities and to reduce them. So let's say we are at 95% non-value added, and all of a sudden we go to 94. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but we've now added 1%, and that means we basically have around a 20% improvement in our productivity, which is a big deal. Right? So what we want to do in Lean IT, and generally in Lean, is to lean out your processes, in our case our IT processes. And by doing so, we'll save money, reduce time to deliver services. So saving the money, it goes back to what I said, find that fat in your processes and reduce it and use that money either in other areas of your organization or redeploy it within your IT group. We definitely want to reduce time to deliver services because, again, the more we can reduce that time, the more service we can provide. And it also helps you to focus on projects that matter to the business. So I have a simple graphic that I actually got from the internet when you do your search in PowerPoint, but it's a simple graphic and it shows us that it's important. So on the outside, we have to start thinking systems thinking. We have to start doing systems thinking, which is the process of understanding how those things which may be regarded as systems in our organization actually interact with other systems within our whole organization. So even though we're talking about IT reacts with business processes. So we need to think about how those two things work together. Then we start looking at individual processes and we want to start to lean them out. And again, at the end of the day, we want to have agile processes that can react quickly to the customer and provide value to the customer. In Lean, there are 5 key principles, and we'll talk about each one in detail, but just here are the 5 value. You know, we want to make sure that we understand what contributes to the product meeting the customer's need. What is it that meets the customer's need? And then we have to have actions that produces the service that the customer requires. We have to have flow. That means that the services should move constantly, flowing from the raw material, the inputs, to the outputs, whatever that finished product might be for our customer, that product or service. As well, we should have pull, which means that somebody downstream, some downstream activities, so maybe another process or maybe our internal customer will be requesting that we provide that service. Otherwise, if we push it, then what we're doing is we're creating inventory and overproduction and wasting resources again. Even though we can never be perfect, we're striving for perfection, which means that we'll be involved in continual improvement and always working on improving our process. So what is value? Well, it's the specific product that meets a customer's needs. It really, as it says, is what's important to the customer. And when we understand what is important to the customer, then we find out what the customer is willing to pay for. So sometimes to do this, you have to basically walk in the customer's shoes and understand what they are. I'm sure you've been to websites and you've logged in and you used them and said, have these people ever used this site themselves? It's not very user-friendly. Now, sometimes we will find things that are not value-added. I keep saying that, value-added, non-value-added. There is work that is necessary in our organization that is non-value-added. We have to do things like recruit people for our IT group. We have to do financing of our IT systems and infrastructure. As well, we have to do budgeting for our people and our systems. And we have to do accounting as well for all of those. And hopefully in your organization you are doing testing. Now, your particular customer may say that, you know, a test is required as part of the product and then is willing to pay for that. But generally, they consider that you've tested the product before you released it to them. So again, use the customer's words to describe the product. Now, sometimes value is a little vague. Unfortunately for us, if we look at COBIT and ITIL, they have attempted to define value creation for us. And as it says there, value creation, enterprise exists to create value for their stakeholders. So our challenge is to understand all our stakeholders. Now, here we see a flow from the stakeholders' needs, which drives the value creation. And value creation is further broken down into three components: benefits realization, risk optimization, resource optimization. So you see the definition of value is realizing benefits at an optimal resource cost while optimizing risk. The challenge in your organization is somebody's going to benefit from something you're doing, and those people might not be the same people who are at risk for what you're doing. And again, a third party might provide the resources to get it done. So your challenge is to negotiate between those three parties, those three different stakeholders who have different goals, and so we have to make sure that their goals become congruent. So for each decision we make, we have to say, for whom are the benefits? Who bears the risk? What resources are required? Now, ITIL expresses it a little different way, but still similar, is they break it down into two parts, which is utility and warranty. Now, if you remember our propositional theory, you can see it being used here with our ors and our ands. So with utility, it's either I have some outcome that I'm looking for, or I want to remove a constraint. It can be either or, and if it's one of those two, then it becomes fit for purpose. With the warranty, though, we want to make sure there's enough availability, there's enough capacity, it's available enough, or sorry, it's continuously available, and that it's secure enough, and for that it has to be and if we have all those things, then we can warrant it, and then it's fit for use. So the value created when we have a product that is fit for purpose, fit for use, so utility and warranty. Now, it doesn't really matter how we define value, but we need to get together with the customer. And one of the techniques of Six Sigma is something called the voice of the customer. We have other things like voice of the process, voice of the business, voice of the regulator, but an important one is voice of the customer, where we sit down and decide who is the customer. Once we understand who is the customer, we try to tease out their requirements. Sometimes we use that with a technique called Moscow. Also in Lean IT, they talk about a KANO, K-A-N-O analysis. Once we understand what are the attributes they require, we need to understand what is critical to quality. So we say, are these necessary for you to be happy about the quality of the information at the end of the day? Because remember, we're talking about information technology, so our deliverable is information, and we want quality information. And we have to figure about how each one of those requirements will impact on our processes. So to do that, we have to come up with a value stream, which we said was a set of actions required to take an input and turn it into an output. Typically, we have three critical management tasks and understand in our organization, I should say, such as a problem-solving task, which is up front. We do our design, we do our engineering, and then we have our information management tasks, where we do things like order taking, scheduling, planning, and then we physically transform something from an input to a finished product. So the value stream is all the activities that affect a product. And an extended value stream would start at the beginning, the very raw material, and end at the item, whatever it might be, the service not being used anymore, or the product being discarded. That would be the extended value stream. But we're concerned with the value stream within our organization. So once you understand the value, you need to understand how it is created. So the best way to do that is to create a value stream map, because it helps everybody understand the current process. So value stream mapping is a lean technique. One of the first things we do is to create a SIPOC diagram, S-I-P-O-C again. Some people call SIPOC, SIPOC, whatever your particular pronunciation. What it stands for is we have our supplier. So who's going to supply the inputs to me, which is the I, and then I'm going to process it, the P, and then I'm going to create an output, the O, which goes to the C, the customer. So that's my SIPOC or SIPC. So I started to diagram that out, and it helps me to understand what the process is. Once I've used that to put bounds around the process, I can do a little bit more detail by taking each one of the identified tasks and adding them to what's called a value stream map. So the value stream analysis is a key starting point in any lean effort. Again, it helps us to break down the value stream into manageable sections, and it also helps us to communicate the flow. So we're going to talk about flow because it is one of our principles, and it helps us to understand the flow of the information and whatever might be the material as it goes through the process. So you have to know where you are and where you want to go. So that's one of the benefits. We do a value stream before, we do a value stream after, and we look at the gaps and we try to come up with something that's ideal. Now we're going to then come up with what's the future, maybe within 1 year. So we have an ideal state, we have a current state, and we're going to have to move from current to ideal, and we're going to take some incremental ways to do that. So again, we're going to use our value stream map to develop an action plan for the future map. So we've done value stream. Next thing we do is flow. So parts flow through a value stream. In our case, we're talking about services. So in our case, customer needs are the parts in the service industry, just as materials and parts are the parts in manufacturing. But we still have upstream, which is the beginning or head of the flow, so where it's coming from, and downstream, which is where it's coming, where the part is pulled by this customer. So downstream, we have some customer that's requesting a service like resetting a password or creating an account or provisioning a laptop. And to do that, we're going to have to start a process of some kind. Now, one of the principles you see in Lean is a concept called JIDOKA, J-I-D-O-K-A, and that's also broken down to something called automation, A-U-T-O-N-O-M-A-T-I-O-N, which is really just has a relationship with just-in-time manufacturing. So parts that are flowing through or services are flowing through. And what you have to do is empower your staff to be able to stop the flow at any point in time when they see a problem with the process or in the quality of the product itself. In the Toyota production system, they called this an andon cord, A-N-D-O-N-C-H-O-R-D. So a physical cord was at one time used. I'd reach up, I'd pull it down, and it would stop the production line. Then it became a button, and then it became a whole series of signals and bells and whistles and everything. But the concept still remains, is that people should be able to stop the flow when they detect a problem in the process or detect a problem with the product quality. So the next thing is, we've talked a few times about this concept of pull. So just like a supermarket depends on the customer to pull the item off the shelf before they can put more on. So I'm stocking the shelves in a supermarket. Somebody has to pull something down so I can put more on. Well, factories and offices should rely on a system where parts or services are also pulled from one station to the next. Without pull, it's like pushing a rope uphill. So we expect somebody to pull something through the process. So one of the things we do is we create a pull system, and the best example is shown here at the bottom of the page, which is a Kanban system. And it basically shows us what to produce, how much to produce, and when to produce it. So again, it's used to limit what we create, when we create it, and how we create it. So I mentioned Kanban, so it's basically the simplest means is that Kan means visual, and Ban means card or cardboard. So it's just a visual system. It's a signaling system to trigger action. We use cards to signal the need for work to be done, and then when it needs to be done, we push it through the various stages, and we keep track of it. It was originally developed by Taichi Ono, who was one of the originators, along with the Toyota family, of the just-in-time manufacturing and the Toyota production system. And they saw it as a good way of focusing on just-in-time production. Now, work in progress is considered to be a type of waste because it's not value to the organization or to the customer. In service industry, we tend to think of these things as things in process. So I'm sitting there, I have a whole bunch of password resets that I have to do, and they're sitting there waiting to be reset. Or somebody wants to commission servers, and they're sitting there and they haven't been spun up, and so that's, again, a thing in process or a work in process. When I have work in process or things in process, you have work that is waiting to be worked on. So that's a type of waste, which is something called a delay. Okay? So if I create a document and it waits for approval, that's an example of delay. So the final principle, we've done 5, is this concept of perfection. Now, as I said, we can't expect perfection, but we expect progress, and we expect to have the best processes we can have. So what we want to do is completely eliminate all waste in any of our processes. That's the lean concept, right? Take the fat out, take the waste out, and then we have the leanest, best processes we can possibly have. So we'll look at all the activities along the value stream that add value to the product and work on those that don't add value and try to eliminate them, try to optimize those that are essential or necessary value added, like recruiting. So we want to optimize those, eliminate the value, non-value added, and improve our value added. And we do that through our ideal state map, which we talked about in the value stream marking. So it's a continuous process improvement methodology. As I said, Toyota's been at this for over 62 years, and they still find waste that they eliminate. You can go through the same exercise in your organization and come up with waste. So I've mentioned waste, and in Lean they call this MUDA, M-U-D-A, and in the standard Toyota production system and even in Lean services, they typically talked about the 7 types of waste: overproduction, inventory, waiting, motion, transportation, rework, overprocessing. In Lean IT, we also add this concept of intellectual or non-productive use of people. So let's look at each quickly in turn. So for waiting, think about it when we have a document that somebody is waiting for sign-off. So I'm sitting there, I can't proceed until somebody signs off. That's a simple type of waste. I could be overproducing something. So again, just last week I provided an exam to a group and I had to print off the exam sheets, and I produced 27 and I only needed 23. Well, that's an example of overproduction and waste. Any extra copies is waste in your organization. The next one is inventory. And again, you know, think about our friends at Walmart, how they became wildly successful as they focused on eliminating as much of the inventory as they can. Whenever you have inventory, that costs your organization money, and it's also costing the customer money unless they're not willing to buy your product because of the price you've got. So again, you know, focus on reducing the amount of inventory, work on the backlogs of work, waiting on resources. So the next one is motion. Again, a good example is it talks about poor search capability. From time to time I do ISO 27001 pre-audit audit kind of thing, where I go in and try to help people get ready for ISO 27001 certification. So the first thing I say to them, do you have an information security policy? And they say, sure, you can find it on the intranet. So I go to the intranet and I put in information security policy, and I get 15 versions of it, and I have to figure out which one of it. Well, that's not a good thing for your employees when they try to find your information security policy and they just can't find the right one. The next one is transportation, and that's just moving stuff around. So we're shuffling paper from one desk to another. But think also where, you know, I know of one service desk that basically they're rewarded by moving a problem as quickly as possible. So they have an event, they just push it sideways. They're not really rewarded on whether they pushed it to the same person, so it might be pushed back to them, and then they're rewarded again for pushing it to somebody else. So this is moving a lot of stuff without much value to the organization. A lot of the organizations are involved in a lot of rework, which is basically reactive kind of stuff. So think about firefighting in your organization. You know, do it right the first time, be proactive, and make sure that you do it correctly. Again, the next second last one is this concept of overprocessing. Think about all those emails where everybody's CC'd everybody and his brother, and everybody and his brother has to open up the email and determine whether it's for them or not. That is an example of overprocessing and obviously a waste in most organizations. Again, we send people on Lean IT courses, we send them on COBIT courses, we send them on ITIL courses. They come back to the organization and they're all jazzed about implementing the things they learned in their job on the course. And then the first thing when they try to do something, they're told, oh, well, that's not the way we do it here. That's a real demoralizer. Plus, it's also a waste of the intellect of the people in your organization. So again, another type of waste. So how do we overcome these? We come up with rapid improvement events. And there's 3 types of rapid improvement events that we'll see on the next slide. So this is where we now bring in one of the major techniques from Six Sigma, which is this concept of DMAIC. You can see DMAIC across the top, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. So we have 3 types of improvement projects. We have JDI, which means just do it, like you got 2 hours, do it in 2 hours kind of thing. And then we have a Kaizen event, which tends to be a, as you can see here, a 7-day event. And then we have Kaikaku events, which tend to be like 7 weeks, right? So each one of the cells is pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to talk about Kaizen in a little bit more detail. So our Kaizen tends to be a traditional improvement. We're just working on repeated incremental improvements, whereas Kaikaku is radical. So we decide to blow up our processes and redesign them. And for that, we use something like DFSS, which is designed for Six Sigma. So we do a Kaizen event. And again, it's just formalized activity to achieve the rapid and dramatic improvement in the organization. But it's typically a few days. Sometimes it can be up to a few weeks, but we try to keep it to a simple, simple process with a limited amount of people. And again, you want to do a Kaizen event to maybe establish a process, change your process, or improve a process. So at the end of the day, your organization is a sum of its parts. Parts are processes. Everything in your organization, within IT, outside of organization, is a process. Your organization is just a conglomeration of processes. So it behooves your organization and you to continually improve your services and your processes, especially those within information and communications technology, where in the past there tended to be a lot of fat or feather bedding and things built in. We used to build Slack into our projects. So you can use Lean and Six Sigma tools and techniques to improve them. So Arta, that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Peter, for this presentation. Now with the time left, we'll go ahead with questions. Therefore, if you have any questions, it's time to ask them. Please use the comment box or raise hand function. The first question, Peter, is what's the assessment model for ITIL? Can you repeat the name?
Sure. Sorry. So the acronym is TIPA, T-I-P-A, and that stands for Tutor, which is the name of a company in Luxembourg, and Tutor is T-U-D-O-R, and then it's ITIL Process Assessment. So Tutor, ITIL Process Assessment.
Thank you. The next question is, can you give some examples of risk optimization in IT?
Sure. So the whole methodology in COBIT is risk-based, and it also is in the TIPA methodology as well. So if we follow ISO 15504, the way we define it is we have a purpose for a particular process, and that purpose is provided by using certain inputs and doing certain activities and providing certain outputs. If we don't do those things, then we are at risk. So what we want to do is to optimize the amount of risk. Now, how do we optimize the amount of risk in our organization? Well, we focus on those processes that contribute most directly to the overall objectives of the organization. So in COBIT, what you would do is what they call a goals cascade. You take the stakeholders' needs, you drive that into enterprise goals, which is driven into IT-related goals, which are driven then down into process goals. And those are the ones I have to focus on because they provide the value to the organization. So that's a very quick overview. It's basically part of other larger courses but for now, that's my answer.
Thank you. The next question is, what's the more mature model for assessment, TIPA or COBIT, assessment model based on ISO 15504?
Well, I would say they're both mature because they're both based on the same model. So it's whether you want to do a governance assessment or you want to do a management assessment. The model, as I said, is exactly the same. The only thing that differs is the process reference model, which is level 1. But for level 2, 3, 4, and 5, we do the exact same thing whether we're looking at COBIT or ITIL. And it's also true of any other process reference model you might want to use. So, you're asking me which is better, ITIL or COBIT. I'm not going to start a religious war at this time.
Thank you. The next question is, how often have you been a witness of Six Sigma belts affecting an organization positively?
Every time I've seen an organization that uses the techniques, they've been very successful. Now the problem when people talk about Six Sigma is that it's a philosophy, it's a tool set, and it's techniques, and sometimes people confuse the three things. So as a philosophy, it's an excellent thing, just as the philosophy of lean is an excellent idea, and the philosophy of agile is an excellent idea. But unfortunately, taking the philosophy and operationalizing it sometimes isn't the same thing. So I've seen good, I've seen bad, but I've definitely seen benefits from the use of Six Sigma techniques.
Thank you. Another question is, from your practical experiences, what are the most common reasons an organization would desire to implement a lean Six Sigma rather than a Six Sigma?
Well, as I said, Six Sigma is usually just used to control variation around the mean. So if you're happy with with the mean and the processes you have, then you'd use those techniques. However, most of us know that there's a little bit of fat, and we could improve the processes themselves. So we're going to use lean to change the processes and to remove the fat. Once we've done that, then we're going to focus on making them the best they are, and that's when Six Sigma comes in. So I see them as complementary. It's not sort of an either-or thing. And these days, I think most people sort of talk lean Six Sigma.
Thank you. Another question here we have is, could you please provide some specific advice as how to embed a lean culture in an IT organization?
In 32 words or less. Like anything in your organization, it has to be set from the top. It has to be toned at the top. So if the people don't believe it at the top, then I'm going to tell you that the people at the bottom aren't going to buy it. So you have to start by enabling change in your organization. And for that, I would recommend something like COBIT. They have an implementation model where they focus a lot on this concept of change enablement. But if you can find some other, like there's PROSCI, P-R-O-S-C-I, which is a change enablement methodology, called ADKAR, A-D-K-A-R, which is, we have to make them aware, we have to create the desire, we have to make them knowledgeable, they have to have the ability, and then we reinforce it. I don't care what methodology you do, but it's the same thing. We have to create that call to action to get people involved and to see them that there is a need to improve. If they don't see the fat and the waste in your organization, then you're going to have difficulty pushing it down, or up.
Thank you, Peter, for this very informative and clear presentation. Because of the time limited, we will have to conclude this presentation. However, if you have any other questions, you can send your questions through email and we will answer to them individually. I want to thank all attendees as well for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. To keep up with our webinars, please check PECB's webinar schedule on our website, pecb.com, or our official social media network, since next week we are organizing webinars on interesting topics. Thank you again, Peter. It was our pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
And good luck to everybody.